everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be going on a deep dive into the world of personality.
Okay.
And specifically personality disorders.
All right.
I'm really excited about this one because you shared this book with me called Personality Disorders in Modern Life.
Yes.
And I have to admit, it's a bit intimidating just looking at it.
It's a thick book.
Yeah, very academic. So
It is.
I'm excited to dive into it with you and see what we find.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating exploration of not only the different types of personality disorders, but also kind of the different schools of thought about how those disorders develop and how we understand them.
Okay, so right off the bat, the book makes this distinction between personality, character, and temperament.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of people kind of use those terms interchangeably.
Yeah.
But they really do mean very different things.
They do.
So can we start by kind of breaking down those three terms?
Sure. So I think of personality as the whole package.
Mm.
So it's your unique blend of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
Right.
It's what makes you you, right?
Right.
And then when we talk about character,
Yeah.
character is more about your moral compass, your sense of right and wrong.
Yeah.
And it's shaped a lot by your upbringing, your values, the societal norms that you've kind of internalized.
So it's more about how you should be
Exactly.
versus who you are.
Right. Personality is more at your core.
Got it. Got it.
And then temperament.
Yeah.
This is the biological foundation of personality, so it's like your innate disposition.
Okay.
It's those inborn tendencies that you see even in babies.
Right.
Like how reactive are they? What are their energy levels? What's their general mood?
Yeah.
Some babies are just chill, and some are a lot more spirited right from the get-go.
That's so true. I've seen it.
Yeah,
So temperament is like the nature part of the equation.
exactly.
And then character is more the nurture side of things.
Right.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, the book uses the DSM-IV as a framework for discussing personality disorders.
Yeah.
Can you give us like a little rundown of what that is and why it's important in the context of our deep dive here?
So the DSM-IV is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and it's essentially the go-to guide for mental health professionals to diagnose mental disorders,
Okay.
including personality disorders.
Okay.
So it provides this common language and criteria for identifying those conditions,
Right.
which is really important for research and treatment.
So it's like a roadmap to understanding and classifying these disorders.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing it's not as simple as just like checking off a list of symptoms, right?
You're right. So the DSM-IV uses a multiaxial model,
Okay.
which means that it looks at the whole person,
Okay.
not just their symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
So it considers things like their medical history, any other mental health conditions they may have,
Okay.
even their social environment and stressors.
Oh, wow.
So it's really like a holistic assessment
Yeah.
for the mind.
For the mind. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So it's not about just like slapping on a label, but really understanding the context
Right.
of someone's life.
Mm.
Okay, so the book kind of delves into the history of how we've understood personality and its disorders,
Yeah.
starting with what it calls the classical foundations.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, no discussion of personality would be complete without mentioning Freud.
Of course not. So Freud's theories, though they're sometimes controversial, were really groundbreaking for their time.
Right.
He proposed that our personality is shaped by this interplay of three psychic forces: the id, the ego, and the superego.
Ah, yes, the famous Freudian trio.
Exactly.
Can you remind us what each of those represents?
Sure. So the id is all about those primal urges and desires.
Okay.
It operates on what Freud called the pleasure principle, seeking immediate gratification without really regard for consequences.
Okay.
So think of it as like the impulsive, demanding child within us.
Okay, got
The
it.
superego
Yeah.
is like our internalized moral compass. So it represents the rules, values, societal expectations that we've kind of absorbed throughout our lives. It's the voice of conscience, always trying to keep the id in check.
So it's like the angel on one shoulder
Exactly.
and the devil on the other.
Right.
Okay, and then where does the ego fit into all of this?
So the ego is the mediator. So it tries to balance the demands of the id and the superego
Okay.
with the realities of the external world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the voice of reason, trying to find realistic and acceptable ways to satisfy our needs
Right.
and desires without getting us into too much trouble.
Without getting us into too much trouble. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's like a constant negotiation
It is.
between our impulses, our morals, and the kind of constraints of reality.
Right.
Gotcha.
And Freud also emphasized the importance of early childhood experiences, particularly during what he called the psychosexual stages of development. And he believed that if we experience trauma or get kind of stuck at a particular stage, it can have an influence on our adult personality and relationships.
Okay, that's some pretty heavy stuff.
It is.
But the book doesn't just focus on Freud.
No.
It also explores object relations theory, which seems like a bit of a shift in focus.
It is. It's still rooted in psychodynamic thinking,
Okay.
but it shifts the emphasis away from those inner drives that Freud talked about so much
Okay.
to our early relationships, and especially our relationships with our caregivers.
Okay.
So the basic idea is that these early relationships form the basis for what are called our internal working models,
Okay.
which are these mental representations of ourselves and others,
Mm-hmm.
and those shape how we see the world and interact with people throughout our lives.
So if those early relationships were healthy and secure,
Right.
we're more likely to develop like a positive sense of self and have good relationships
Man.
as adults.
Yeah.
But if those early relationships were full of conflict or
Right.
neglect, then that can lead to problems with trust
Yes.
and intimacy and just a stable sense of self.
Exactly. And that idea of early experiences shaping our internal working models is really central to understanding how personality disorders develop.
Okay, so we've got Freud. We've got object relations theory. Now, the book also delves into the biological perspective,
Yes.
exploring how our genes and our brain chemistry play a role in who we are. And this is where nature and nurture really start to dance, don't they?
They do. And one key concept here is temperament,
Right, right.
which we talked about a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
So some people are just naturally predisposed to certain traits based on their biology.
Okay.
For example, some people are born with a more sensitive nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
which might make them more prone to anxiety or shyness.
Makes sense.
And there's a researcher named Cloninger
Yes.
who took this idea even further.
Yeah, he linked specific neurotransmitters to personality traits.
He did, which is fascinating.
I know, it's so cool.
Yeah.
So remind us about Cloninger's theory.
So he proposed that levels of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin
Mm-hmm.
influence our tendencies toward things like novelty seeking, harm avoidance, and reward dependence.
Okay.
So if you're somebody who's always seeking out thrills and new experiences,
Right.
you might have lower levels of dopamine activity.
Interesting.
On the other hand, if you're more cautious and anxious, you might have higher levels of serotonin activity.
So you're saying our brain chemistry might actually be playing a role in whether we're like the life of the party or the wallflower?
Could be.
Wow, that's so interesting.
And the book also talks about how some personality disorders, like antisocial personality disorder and schizotypal personality disorder, seem to have a strong genetic component.
Okay.
So researchers have found higher rates of these disorders among biological relatives, which suggests that genes are likely playing a role.
So heredity influencing personality.
Right. It's a fascinating area of research.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got this interplay of biology and early experiences that are shaping our personality.
Yeah.
But the book doesn't stop there, does it?
No, it keeps going.
It also explores the interpersonal perspective,
Yes.
which really focuses on how our social interactions mold who we are. So it's not just what's going on inside of us.
Right.
It's also how we connect with the world around us.
Exactly. And Harry Stack Sullivan, who was a pioneer in this perspective, he believed that personality is essentially forged in the crucible of social interactions.
Okay.
Especially those early interactions with significant others.
So he's saying that our sense of self is actually constructed through those interactions with others.
Through those reflected appraisals we get from others.
Okay.
We see ourselves through the eyes of those around us, and those perceptions become internalized, shaping our self-concept and our expectations and relationships.
That's a powerful concept.
It is, yeah.
That we become who we are in part by how other people see us.
Right.
Wow, okay. And then there's Timothy Leary,
Yes.
who proposed that personality kind of operates on these different levels, from the public persona that we present to the world to the deepest, most private aspects of ourselves.
Exactly. It's like we're onions with layers and layers of personality.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Layers of personality, okay?
And he also developed what's called the interpersonal circumplex,
Okay.
which is a visual representation of different interpersonal styles.
Okay.
So imagine a circle with two axes,
Okay.
one for dominance and one for affiliation.
Gotcha.
And different personality styles kind of fall at different points on this circle based on their typical ways of relating to others.
Okay. I love visuals, so help me picture this.
Sure.
Where would someone who's very assertive and outgoing fall on that circle?
So someone who's high in dominance and also high in affiliation, meaning they enjoy connecting with others, might fall in the quadrant associated with leadership or charisma.
Gotcha.
They might be very confident and sociable, comfortable taking charge and engaging with people.
Okay, what about someone who's more withdrawn and quiet?
Someone low in dominance and low in affiliation might fall in the quadrant associated with introversion or detachment.
Okay.
So they might be more comfortable in solitude, preferring to observe rather than engage.
Okay, so we're plotting personalities on this map.
Yeah, kind of.
How they relate to other.
Exactly.
Got it.
And there's also this idea of complementarity in relationships.
Yes.
So the idea is that we tend to seek out interactions that confirm our sense of self.
Okay.
So if you see yourself as helpful and nurturing, you might be drawn to someone who's more assertive and decisive.
Right.
And your styles kind of complement each other.
It's like pieces of a puzzle fitting together.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
But what happens when personalities are more rigid, less adaptable?
That's where things can get tricky. Because if someone has this very fixed and narrow view of themselves, they might have trouble adapting to different interpersonal situations.
Okay.
They might always need to be in control,
Right.
or always need to be the center of attention. And this can create friction and conflict in relationships.
Yeah.
Because their rigid style might clash with the needs and styles of those around them.
Right. It's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly.
Okay, so flexibility and adaptability seem crucial
They are.
for navigating the complexities of human relationships.
Absolutely.
Now, building on these ideas of interpersonal patterns and self-concept, the book also mentions Benjamin's structural analysis of social behavior.
Yes.
SAB.
SAB, that's right.
Okay, can you break that down for us a bit?
So SAB is a way of looking at how our early experiences shape those internal working models we talked about,
Okay.
which then influence our behavior in current relationships.
Gotcha.
So it's a way of understanding the really intricate tapestry of how we relate to one another.
Okay, so it's all connected.
It is.
Our past experiences are shaping our present relationships, and those relationships can either reinforce those old patterns or offer opportunities for growth and change.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, that brings us to the cognitive perspective, which really focuses on the mental processes behind personality.
Yeah.
And I think this is where things get really interesting.
It is a fascinating area.
Because it highlights the power of our minds.
It does.
To influence our experiences and our interactions with the world.
Right.
So we're back and ready to dive into this whole cognitive perspective on personality.
Right.
I have to admit, I find this area really intriguing.
Yeah.
This idea that our thoughts and our perceptions play such a huge role in shaping who we are.
It really highlights how powerful our minds are in influencing our experiences and how we interact with the world around us.
Yeah.
The cognitive perspective essentially argues that our personality is a reflection of our unique patterns of thinking, interpreting information, and making sense of our experiences.
So it's not just about what happens to us, it's also about how we process those events.
Exactly, exactly.
And the book highlights some key concepts that really illustrate this idea.
Yeah.
For example, Piaget's work on cognitive development.
Right.
And specifically his concepts of assimilation and accommodation. Now, Piaget, I kind of vaguely remember him from like Intro to Psych.
Yeah.
Wasn't he all about the stages of cognitive development?
He was.
Like sensorimotor and preoperational?
Yeah, he did a lot of work on how children learn and develop.
Okay, so how does that relate to personality?
Well, assimilation is the process of fitting new information into our existing mental frameworks.
Okay.
Kind of like adding a new file to an already organized folder.
Okay, so it's like we're taking new information and trying to make it fit.
Yeah, into our pre-existing categories.
Into those existing categories, okay?
Accommodation, on the other hand, involves changing those frameworks to make room for new information that doesn't quite fit.
Okay.
It's like creating a whole new folder.
Oh, I see, I see.
For a different category of information.
Okay, so assimilation is about keeping our existing schemas.
Yeah, kind of maintaining the status quo.
And accommodation is about being more flexible.
Right,
adapting to new information.
Exactly.
Okay, but how does this all relate to personality?
Well, different personality styles might use these processes differently.
Oh, okay.
So think about someone with a compulsive personality.
Okay.
They might be very rigid in their thinking, always trying to fit things into those pre-existing categories and expectations.
Okay, so they're really trying to assimilate.
Yes, they might have trouble with change or uncertainty because they're so focused on maintaining order and control.
Because it challenges their sense of how things should be.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
But someone with a more narcissistic personality might be more comfortable with accommodation. They might be more flexible in their thinking, willing to adjust their self-image or their beliefs to maintain a sense of superiority.
Interesting.
Or to fit in with a particular social group.
Oh, so they're kind of changing their framework.
Yeah, they're more willing to shift things around.
To suit their needs.
Exactly.
Okay, that's fascinating.
So even these basic cognitive processes can be expressed so differently.
Yeah.
Depending on our personality.
Wow.
And speaking of differences, the book also talks about cognitive distortions.
Yes.
Which are those systematic errors in thinking that can really trip us up.
Yeah, it's like our brain is taking these mental shortcuts.
Right, exactly.
That they often lead us down the wrong path.
Yeah, they distort our perceptions and they influence our emotions and behaviors in negative ways.
Okay, so can you give me an example of cognitive distortion?
Sure. One common one is all or nothing thinking.
Okay.
Also known as black and white thinking.
Right.
This is when we see things in extremes. There's no middle ground.
Yeah.
So we might think, if I don't get this promotion, I'm a complete failure.
Right. Or if my partner doesn't agree with me, it means they don't love me.
Exactly. No shades of gray.
No shades of gray, just black and white.
Right.
Oh, it's so exhausting being around people like that.
It can be.
Okay, what's another one?
Another common distortion is catastrophizing.
Okay.
Which is when we imagine the worst possible outcome in any given situation.
Right. Like if I give this presentation, I'm going to totally bomb.
Exactly. Or if I go on this date, it's going to be a disaster.
It's like those what-if scenarios.
Yeah, it's like those what-if scenarios that can spiral out of control.
And just suck the joy out of everything.
Right. And the thing is, these distortions can become really ingrained in our thinking patterns.
Yeah.
So they shape how we interpret situations and how we react to them.
So they become like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
They can. For example, if you're prone to personalization.
Okay.
You might always blame yourself when things go wrong, even if it's not your fault.
Yeah, even if it's not your fault.
And that can lead to feelings of guilt, shame, inadequacy.
Okay, so it's like these negative thought patterns are just constantly reinforcing themselves.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and the book also suggests that certain cognitive styles or ways of thinking are often associated with specific personality disorders.
They are.
Okay, so we talked about how compulsives might be more rigid in their thinking, always trying to fit things into those schemas. But what about some of the other personality disorders?
So people with avoidant personality disorder, for example, they might be prone to something called negative filtering, which is when we focus almost exclusively on the negative aspects of a situation and ignore or minimize the positive.
Oh, yeah.
So this can really reinforce their fears of social rejection or criticism, making them even more reluctant to put themselves out there.
It's like they're only seeing the bad stuff.
Right, exactly.
Blocking out all the good.
Exactly. And someone with histrionic personality disorder might be more inclined toward emotional reasoning. Which is when we let our feelings dictate our interpretations of events. So they might overreact to situations, seeing things as more dramatic or catastrophic than they really are.
Right.
Which feeds into their need for attention. And their tendency to be theatrical in their expressions.
So it's not just their behavior, it's the thoughts behind it.
Exactly. Those cognitive patterns combined with biological factors, early experiences, and interpersonal dynamics all contribute to the development of these personality disorders.
So I've got this complex interplay of nature and nurture shaping who we are. But how do those personality quirks, those unique ways of thinking and behaving, how do they sometimes become more problematic?
Right. How do they cross that line into a disorder?
Yeah. How does the book explain the development of personality disorders?
Well, it emphasizes that it's not a simple either-or situation. It's not just our genes. It's not just our environment.
Right.
It's this intricate dance between our genetic predispositions and our life experiences and how those two forces interact.
So it's like a complex recipe.
It is, yeah.
With lots of ingredients.
Lots of ingredients.
And the proportions of those ingredients can vary.
They can, from person to person.
From person to person, okay.
And one of the key ingredients in this recipe is early childhood experiences.
Okay, here we go. The parental influence.
Right, especially those involving our parents or primary caregivers.
Yeah. Seems like we always come back to that.
We do, and for good reason.
Yeah.
Those early relationships really lay the foundation for how we see ourselves, how we relate to others, and how we navigate the world.
Okay.
The book highlights how parental teachings, modeling, and communication styles can all contribute to the development of maladaptive patterns that might later manifest as personality disorders.
So can you give me some examples of how that might play out?
Sure. So imagine a child growing up with parents who are constantly critical and demanding, never offering praise or validation. That child might internalize those messages and develop this deep-seated sense of inadequacy and a constant need to prove their worth. This could set the stage for a narcissistic personality, always seeking external validation and admiration.
To compensate for that inner void.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, what about a child who grows up in a more chaotic and unpredictable environment?
Yeah, so maybe their parents struggle with addiction or mental health issues. That child might learn to be hypervigilant, always on edge, trying to anticipate the next crisis. They might have difficulty trusting others or forming secure attachments, which could lead to an anxious or avoidant attachment style, and potentially set the stage for an avoidant or borderline personality.
It's heartbreaking to think about.
It is.
The impact these early experiences can have on a child's developing sense of self.
It really underscores the importance of providing a safe and nurturing and predictable environment for kids. Where they can feel loved and supported.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The book also talks about the concept of pathogenic experiences. Which are those traumatic or deeply distressing events that can leave a lasting impact on our psyche.
So things like abuse or neglect.
Yeah, physical or sexual neglect, witnessing violence, experiencing a major loss or separation.
Those are some really heavy experiences.
They are, and it's understandable how they could have a profound impact on someone's development.
Especially during those early years.
Those early years are so crucial. And the book suggests that these pathogenic experiences might interact with biological vulnerabilities, meaning there might be a genetic predisposition that makes someone more susceptible
to those negative effects.
To the negative effects of trauma.
It's like a double whammy.
It is, yeah.
You've got the genetic predisposition, and then you have the trauma on top of that.
Right. So it's not just about the event itself. It's also about the individual's resilience and their capacity to cope.
That makes sense.
Now, the book also explores some evolutionary and neurodevelopmental perspectives on personality disorders, which offer kind of different lenses through which to understand these conditions.
Oh, evolutionary psychology, that always gets people thinking.
It does. So how do personality disorders fit into the grand scheme of evolution?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the book discusses Millon's evolutionary theory, which suggests that even these seemingly maladaptive personality styles might have roots in survival and adaptation strategies that were beneficial at some point in our evolutionary history.
Wait, so you're saying traits that we now consider disordered might have actually helped our ancestors survive?
It might seem counterintuitive.
It does, a little bit.
But think about it. Take the paranoid personality, for example. They're constantly on guard, suspicious of others, hypervigilant to potential threats. In a dangerous and unpredictable environment, those traits might have been crucial for survival, helping our ancestors avoid predators or hostile frames.
So paranoia as an evolutionary advantage?
It's possible, yeah.
Wow. Okay, what about a personality style, like the dependent personality?
Yeah.
Always needing reassurance and support.
Right.
How could that be adaptive?
Well, in a tight-knit social group where cooperation was essential for survival. Relying on others might have been a successful strategy. Those who were more interdependent might have received more support and protection from the group. Increasing their chances of survival. And passing on their genes.
So even seemingly negative traits might have served a purpose.
They might have, in our evolutionary past.
That is mind-blowing.
It's a different way of thinking about things.
It is. It is.
So how does this evolutionary perspective help us understand these disorders today?
Yeah, in the context of modern life.
In the context of modern life, well, the book goes on to suggest that each personality disorder can be seen as an extreme variant of an otherwise normal coping mechanism.
Okay.
So those same traits that might have been adaptive in moderation can become problematic when they're taken to an extreme.
Okay.
Or expressed in a rigid, inflexible way.
So it's like the volume gets turned up way too high.
Yeah, exactly.
On those traits, making them maladaptive in the modern world.
In the modern world, yeah.
And I think this is where those case studies that the book weaves throughout the discussion become so powerful.
They do, because they bring these theories to life.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to talk about these abstract concepts.
Right.
Like cognitive distortions or interpersonal styles. But it's another thing altogether to see them play out in someone's story.
Right. To see how they actually affect people's lives.
To understand the struggles and the complexities they face.
Yeah, it's like watching a documentary.
It is, yeah.
That puts a human face on these diagnoses.
Exactly.
And reminds us that we're not just talking about categories.
Right.
We're talking about real people.
Real people.
With real feelings and experiences.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're back, and I'm ready to dig into the specific personality disorders covered in personality disorders in modern life.
Okay.
There are quite a few to unpack, so
all right.
where should we start?
Well, the book kicks things off with antisocial personality disorder, which is often portrayed in movies and TV shows.
Right.
But those depictions aren't always very accurate.
Right, right.
In reality, this disorder is characterized by a persistent disregard for rules and a tendency to engage in behaviors that violate the rights of others.
So we're talking about people who might lie, cheat, steal, or even engage in violence without really feeling any remorse for their actions.
Yeah, and it's important to note that research suggests this disorder might present differently in men and women. So while men might be more prone to physical aggression or criminal behavior, women with antisocial personality disorder might express their disregard for rules through more subtle means, like manipulation, deceit, or exploiting others for personal gain.
It's like that stereotype of the con artist or the manipulative social climber.
Exactly.
Okay, but regardless of how it manifests, it seems like a core feature of this disorder is a lack of empathy.
It is. People with antisocial personality disorder often have difficulty understanding or caring about the impact of their actions on others.
Right, right.
They might be charming and charismatic on the surface, but underneath that facade, there's this profound disconnect from the emotional experiences of those around them.
Okay, yeah, that's a chilling thought.
It can be a tough one.
So moving on to something completely different, the book also discusses avoidant personality disorder, which seems to be kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum from antisocial personality disorder. These are individuals who are intensely afraid of social rejection or criticism.
Exactly. People with avoidant personality disorder often go to great lengths to avoid social situations or interactions where they might be judged or evaluated.
So they're constantly worried about saying or doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, they're afraid of being ridiculed or humiliated.
Okay, so it's like they're living in this constant state of social anxiety.
It can be very challenging for them.
Yeah.
They might long for connection and intimacy, but that fear of rejection keeps them trapped in this cycle of avoidance.
Now, earlier we talked about the compulsive personality.
Yes.
With their need for perfection and control. Can you remind us what some of the key features of that disorder are?
Sure. So people with compulsive personality disorder often have this really strong need for order and predictability.
Okay.
They might be very detail-oriented, meticulous in their work.
Okay.
And highly organized in their personal lives.
Right.
They might also have a hard time relaxing or delegating tasks.
Oh.
Because they feel like they have to do everything themselves to make sure it's done right.
I can relate to that, but it sounds like it can become really problematic.
It can.
When it starts to interfere with relationships.
It can, yeah.
Or just flexibility in general.
Right. People with this disorder might have difficulty with spontaneity.
Yeah.
Or going with the flow.
Right.
And they might also become so focused on the details that they lose sight of the bigger picture or the emotional needs of those around them.
So it's like their need for control ends up controlling them.
In a way, yeah.
And then there's the dependent personality, which is characterized by this strong need to be taken care of.
Right.
And a fear of being alone or abandoned.
Exactly.
So these are folks who might have trouble making decisions.
Yeah, they might have trouble making decisions on their own.
On their own.
Or asserting themselves in relationships.
Okay.
They might rely heavily on others for reassurance, guidance, and approval, even in situations where they're perfectly capable of handling things themselves.
Wow.
And they might also go to great lengths to please others, even if it means sacrificing their own needs or values.
It sounds like a recipe for some unhealthy relationships.
It can be, yeah, for sure.
Okay, and speaking of unhealthy relationship patterns, the book also covers histrionic personality disorder.
Yes.
Which is characterized by this pervasive pattern of excessive emotionality and attention-seeking behavior.
Right, so we're talking about the drama queens and kings of the personality world?
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
People with histrionic personality disorder might be very theatrical in their expressions.
Okay.
Often seeking to be the center of attention.
Right, right.
They might also be easily influenced by others.
Okay.
And have a tendency to kind of shift their emotions or opinions to fit in with the crowd.
It's like they're always performing for an audience.
Yeah, they're always on stage in a way.
Okay, and then of course there's narcissistic personality disorder, which we touched upon a little bit earlier.
Right, so these are individuals with that grandiose sense of self-importance and a deep need for admiration.
So they might brag about their accomplishments, expect special treatment,
Exactly.
and have a hard time empathizing with others.
Right, they might seem confident and self-assured on the surface.
Okay.
But underneath that facade is often a fragile ego.
Right.
That needs constant validation and reinforcement.
So it's like a house of cards?
Yeah, it can be.
Where any perceived criticism or slight can just send their whole world crashing down.
Exactly.
Now, another personality disorder that's often misunderstood is schizoid personality disorder.
Yeah, this one can be tricky.
So these individuals are often perceived as aloof or distant.
Right.
Because they tend to withdraw from social relationships and they prefer solitude.
They do. And it's not that they're necessarily afraid of social interaction like someone with avoidant personality disorder.
Okay.
They just genuinely prefer to be alone.
Okay.
They might find social interaction draining or overwhelming, and they might not experience the same level of pleasure or reward from social connection that most people do.
Okay.
They might also have a limited range of emotional expression.
Right.
Appearing flat or indifferent to others.
And then there's schizotypal personality disorder,
Yeah.
which seems to share some similarities with schizophrenia.
Yeah, so people with schizotypal personality disorder often have unusual thoughts or perceptions.
Okay.
And they might engage in eccentric behavior.
Okay.
They might also have difficulty distinguishing between reality and fantasy.
Oh, wow.
And they might have odd beliefs or magical thinking.
That sounds like a really challenging way to experience the world.
It can be, yeah.
And then there's paranoid personality disorder.
Right, which is characterized by a pervasive distrust and suspiciousness of others.
So these are the people who might constantly suspect that others are trying to deceive them or harm them.
Yeah, even when there's no evidence to support those beliefs.
Wow, okay.
They might misinterpret innocent remarks or actions as having hidden meanings or malicious intent.
Right.
They might hold grudges for a long time.
Okay.
And have difficulty trusting even those closest to them.
That level of mistrust must make it incredibly hard to form and maintain relationships.
It does, yeah.
Okay, and then we have borderline personality disorder.
Yes, this one is often characterized by intense emotional instability, impulsivity, and stormy relationships.
So we're talking about people who might experience extreme mood swings, engage in risky behaviors, and have this intense fear of abandonment.
Exactly. And it's important to note that borderline personality disorder is often associated with a history of trauma or abuse.
Right.
And many people with this disorder have experienced significant emotional pain and instability in their lives.
It sounds like they're carrying a lot of baggage.
They are.
From the past that impacts their ability to function in the present.
It can be very difficult, yeah.
Okay, it's a complex and challenging disorder.
It is.
But it sounds like with the right support and treatment, people can learn to manage their emotions and build healthy relationships.
Absolutely. It's definitely possible.
Now, the book also mentions a couple of personality disorders that were removed from the main section of the DSM.
Yes.
Like self-defeating personality disorder
Right.
and sadistic personality disorder.
Right. So self-defeating personality disorder, which was also known as masochistic personality disorder, was characterized by a pattern of self-sabotaging behavior and a tendency to choose situations or relationships that lead to disappointment or suffering.
Oh, wow.
There was a lot of debate about whether this was a distinct disorder or simply a variation of other personality styles, like dependent personality disorder or depressive personality disorder.
So it's like they're unconsciously setting themselves up for failure.
It could be, yeah. And sadistic personality disorder was characterized by a pattern of deriving pleasure from inflicting pain or humiliation on others. This disorder was also controversial and ultimately removed from the DSM due to concerns about its potential for misuse or misdiagnosis.
Yeah, those are some pretty intense personality styles.
They are.
And I can see how there would be a lot of discussion and debate about how to classify them.
Yeah, there was a lot of back and forth on those.
So the world of personality disorders is a vast and complex landscape.
It is.
With a lot of nuances and variations.
A lot of nuances.
That make diagnosis really challenging.
It is challenging.
But also super fascinating.
It is fascinating, yeah.
And it's important to remember that we're not just talking about abstract categories.
Right,
we're talking about real people struggling with real challenges.
Absolutely. And these disorders can cause significant distress and impairment.
Right.
And it's crucial to approach them with empathy and understanding.
Yes, absolutely.
And the book emphasizes that while personality disorders can be challenging to treat, there is hope for healing and growth. Therapy can help individuals develop healthier coping mechanisms, improve their relationships, and build more fulfilling lives.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, so it's not a hopeless situation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into personality and its disorders, what's the one key takeaway you hope listeners will remember?
I think the most important thing to remember is that personality is complex.
Yes.
And even those patterns of behavior that we label as disordered can often be understood as extreme variants of normal coping mechanisms. That might have served a purpose in our evolutionary past. So it's really about recognizing the humanity behind the diagnoses, approaching these disorders with curiosity and compassion, and holding on to the hope that healing and transformation are always possible.
That's beautiful. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I think so, too.
Thank you so much for joining us on this fascinating journey into the world of personality.
It's been a pleasure.
I hope our listeners found it as insightful as I did.
Me too.
And to our listeners, remember, there's always more to discover about ourselves and the world around us.
Always more to learn.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep diving deep.